The other week, my wife and I set off on an adventure to explore the Mighty Five National Parks in Utah. I gave this tour as a gift for our 7-year wedding anniversary because one of our goals as a couple is to go to every national park together. When I gave her the gift, she responded with, well, if we're flying in Vegas, why not add Death Valley? So that's exactly what we did. Once we landed in Vegas, I took the most mediocre photo of the sphere that is known to man, and we completely avoided the slot machines in the airport, grabbed our rental car, and headed to Death Valley. Once we got into Death Valley, we set up camp, and I took photos. I could not help myself. It was so beautiful, and just something about the first night of a trip. The next morning, we hit sunrise at Zabriskie Point, and we explored the rest of the park. But then we made our way over to Zion National Park to kick off our Mighty Five Parks adventure. So let's talk about gear. Because we were backpacking through these parks, I wanted to pack pretty light. So I brought along my Leica SL2 with the 24-70. That is my go-to combo. And then my Leica Mini Lux. And I went a little bit overkill here, and I brought my Bronica ETRS. I only used one roll of film in the Bronica, and looking back, it was definitely just dead weight. So we drove down from our campsite. Got on the shuttle and started our trip up the West Rim. As somebody who lives in the Midwest, I just saw 6 miles. And was like, that's easy, we can hike 6 miles. I did not take into account the 3,000 feet elevation gain, which was fine, but once we made it up the mountain, got to our campsite, set up camp, we got water, which the water was flowing, and we had dinner and enjoyed the sunset from our campsite. It was a beautiful view, and honestly, one of the better nights on this trip. We had really nobody else around us, and it was such a beautiful way to kick off the first park. And we knew that we were doing Angel's Landing in the morning, so right after sunset, we went to sleep. The next morning, hiked down the West Rim, which was significantly more enjoyable than hiking up it, and got to Angel's Landing way before anybody else got to it. So we hiked out on Angel's Landing and had it completely to ourselves. It was such a beautiful morning and such a special experience to share with my wife. And yeah, Angel's Landing, at no point did I feel like unsafe, but it definitely was a fun hike, definitely very interesting to take. After Angel's Landing, just to stick with the timeline, I really wanted to go to the Narrows, but we had to start making our way towards Bryce Canyon. Bryce Canyon's one of those places that when you look up the travel guides, people are like, once you've seen one hoodoo, you've seen them all. But there's really no way to explain how cool this park is. We got there and immediately went for like a 4 or 5 mile hike, loop just in the canyon. And it was so gorgeous and so fun and such a pleasant surprise because though there was elevation gain and loss, it was not as much as at Zion. So we had sunset at Sunset Point, and we made dinner. And that is where I finished off my first and only roll that I shot through the Bronica. So these photos they're fine. They're good pictures. They are just, I'm kind of kicking myself for not using the Bronica more, but also there wasn't really situations where I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be better than my SL2 or my Mini Lux. I definitely should have just left it at home because, yeah, it was dead weight. So the next morning, we went back into Bryce Canyon because we didn't stay in that park, and we did some more exploring. We went to lookouts and just had an awesome time. Bryce Canyon, I definitely overshot, but I'm not mad about it because I'm really happy with the pictures that I got while I was there. After Bryce Canyon, we made our way over to Capitol Reef, and Capitol Reef I was super excited about because I wanted to get to the Temple of the Sun and Moon. Explored some of the more historical stuff, which was actually really interesting and really fun. We went through the orchard and grabbed an apple each and enjoyed those in the park. Mediocre apples, but the location was really cool. And then we did a hike, Hangman's Bridge, I believe it was called. And that was really cool. That was our first arch that we saw, or bridge that we saw in Utah. And I was just like in the back of my mind, I'm like, this is all cool, but Temple of the Sun and Moon is going to make it all worth it. After that hike, we made our way to Cathedral Valley Drive. Now, there's a sign in front of the Cathedral Valley that says impassable for most vehicles, and I knew that I had one of the best off-roading vehicles, a rental car. My wife didn't feel as confident about our car, and after I made it over the dry river with having absolutely everything in the vehicle in the air, and then we bottomed out a couple times, we made the wise decision to turn back because the only other cars that we saw on that trail were lifted Jeeps, and we just didn't feel like we could make it out there. So that was pretty disappointing, I'm not gonna lie, because that was the thing that I was looking forward to the most in Capitol Reef. But we went back into the park and enjoyed a sunset on a lookout on this beautiful hike that was just gorgeous. So the next morning, we went over to Canyonlands. Canyonlands is incredible. It's probably like the sleeper park of the trip for me. I wasn't expecting a whole lot. I had reserved a campsite on the Sinklin Trail, which is an 8-mile loop, and the campsite is about 4 miles in, so it's halfway into the trail. And so we did some lookouts, checked out some of the stuff, left the visitor center, and made our way to the Sinklin Loop. One of the things that I loved about the Sinklin Loop is it is like so, like there's nobody else on it, especially if you're going at the time that we went, which was late afternoon, because we were planning to camp out there. So nobody else is on the trail, and it is a difficult trail to follow, but you really get to experience being down in the canyon where otherwise you wouldn't get to because you need to have a 4x4 vehicle. And as I just discussed with our Cathedral Valley drive, our car wasn't going to make that. So we got to our campsite, set it up, and I had this like super ambitious goal of getting to Mesa Arch by sunrise, which we found out the next morning would have been very difficult because we hiked the rest of the Sinklin Loop and you're climbing out of the canyon now, and it was honestly the most fun hike that we did. Got to do some bouldering and climbing, and it was definitely a slow process, but really, really enjoyable, and made it worth missing out on the Mesa Arch at sunrise because honestly, like, everybody does Mesa Arch at sunrise, so didn't feel too disappointed about that. Then we made our way to our final park, Arches. And Arches definitely has arches. They are everywhere, and it was so cool. We explored, went to all of the different arches that first day, that first evening, but we made our way to Delicate Arch for sunset, which we definitely were not alone. It was not secluded. It was Disneyland, and I was definitely not the only photographer there. It was very busy, but it was just cool to go see one of those iconic Utah spots. Yeah, ultimately, the gear wasn't super exciting on this trip unless you are a huge Leica fan. The mini lugs performed beautifully. It did not get the EO3 error on this trip, which I'm stoked about. Shout out to Red Dot Repair for fixing that ribbon for my camera. And yeah, the SL2 is just, it's a tank. It's a beast of a camera. It was heavy to carry around everywhere because if you've held an SL2 or an SL2S, you know that they are solid metal. And so it is definitely difficult to carry that while you are hiking. Maybe a Q2 or a Q3 could have been a good option for something a little bit lighter. But all in all, I'm very happy with the results that I got from this trip. So if you are interested in seeing more of my national park stuff, I just added a new section on my website that has my national parks photos along with visiting all the national parks together. I'm working on doing a series of each park. So now I'm going through all of my other trips and getting photos from those trips to add to the national parks section. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're still watching, please consider liking and subscribing. And if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. I always like to respond to all of them. And I will see you in the next video.